When you look at the suicide rates in our country, the single biggest killer of men under the age of 40 is themselves. It's suicide. And so I've been mulling this. Are men in particular having certain needs go unmet because of a changing world, in your view?
Everybody has unmet needs because of a changing world. Fact. Are there gender differences? Of course there are gender differences. And how we respond to men versus how we respond to women is different. A friend of mine who was, three things happened to her simultaneously. She's in the military. Three things happened to her simultaneously. Any one of them would be difficult, but all three of them happened to her at the same time. She was promoted to senior management. She became lieutenant colonel. She was deployed for 13 months, 12 months, and she was given her very first command. Okay, so any one of those things is a trial, and all three happened at once, right? And she took over a job where the previous 5 leaders had all been fired. It was a poorly run group. She would be working with people from different forces. So she's in the Air Force. She'd have Air Force and Army reporting to her, some of whom were much older than her and much more experienced than her. And she is a hard-driving, passionate young officer who said, I'm going to turn this group around and I'm going to prove to everybody that I can turn it around. I've been practicing leadership. I've been studying leadership. I want to be a great leader. And it was a failure. They were ignoring her. They weren't taking her seriously. And no matter how she powered up, it didn't work. And every night she would cry herself to sleep and started regretting being in the military. All she wanted to do was go home. She didn't want to be stuck on deployment anymore. What was something really exciting now became a regret. And she didn't know what to do. She was failing, which was hard for her to deal with alone. I mean, as it was. And so she decided to give up. And she said, I will not turn this group around. So if I'm going to fail at my job, then and I'm stuck here for another 6 months, and so is everybody else, I'm going to change my mandate. And instead of turning this group around, I'm just going to ensure that the rest of their time here, they really enjoy it. I'm just going to make it more fun for them to come to work every day because they're also away from their families and stuck. And then something strange really started to happen. They started to listen to her, take her seriously. They started to respect her more. And she ended up being very, very high performing at the end, and the group completely turned around. Because on her way in, she made it about herself, and she made it about the metrics, and she made it about the performance. The lesson she learned was, if you make it about the people, then the people will take care of everything else. And I remember I sat down with her a week or two after she got back, and she's telling me this whole story for the first time, after she got back. And she started crying. And when she said to me, she goes, I have never felt a joy so deep as seeing someone discover that they are capable of more than they thought they were. Which is very different than, I'm going to turn this around. So in her telling me this, she said one of the big lessons she learned is there is such thing as female leadership. And she had a conversation with one of the army, one of the soldiers. And why didn't you listen to me? Why was it so difficult? Why did we struggle? And he said point blank, because when a male officer yells at me, right, I take it, I hear it, I move on, right? It's fine. When you yelled at me, I felt like my mother was yelling at me. And it was more difficult, So there are gender differences in how we respond to each other, because it is a mom-dad thing, right? We respond differently. Men are sometimes, not always, but men are sometimes better at just being told blank by another guy, just do this. And you go, okay, well, I'll just do it. But when you create gender, it creates all kinds of other interpretations and associations, like our mothers. So I think we cannot discount those. Traditional male leadership qualities are things like decisiveness, aggression, those kinds of things. Traditional female qualities are things like patience, maternal instinct, empathy. And I think the mistake we've made across all leadership is we teach male leadership. We teach decisiveness and we teach aggression. And these are the things we teach. And we teach that to everybody. And the reality is what makes great leaders is they have a balance. And what we should be teaching is more of female leadership. And, you know, all leaders should take on the qualities of patience and empathy. You know, this is the irony. And so I think we do need to teach those skills. I mean, this goes back to what we were saying before. These are those human skills. You know, women get my work a lot quicker than men. When I was starting my career, you know, women would just nod and be like, yeah, what do you, of course. And men would be like, what are your case studies? And what case studies you have to prove your model?
Logic and...
You know? Men would fight with me on some of the details, and women just intuitively understood that the humanity of the work that I was preaching just made sense. And there's space for that. And so, yeah, I think female leadership and those qualities are just necessary everywhere. But yes, there are differences, and they cannot be discounted.
It's difficult to talk about them though, isn't it? It feels like a minefield. Even when I talk about gender differences, it feels like I'm going to step on a mine somewhere, because you're entirely correct. And my previous company was, our managing director was a woman, and I think the business was more successful because of those qualities you've suggested: empathy, care, patience.
Yeah.
She was much more honest about forecasts.
Yeah.
And how the business was going to perform versus a male leader. I mean, this is such a narrow example, so it's not necessarily truth, but a male managing director we had who was extremely exaggerating and very, very, very ambitious about forecasts that were never realized.
That makes sense. That's consistent. And I think, you know, there's lots of data on this. You know, men, you know, when they apply for a job and they say we need these 10 things, and if they have 6 out of the 10, they apply for the job. And women won't apply for the job unless they have 9 or 10 of the qualities. You know, men are a little, you know, I've seen it happen in meetings where, you know, there's a male entrepreneur and like the client is saying, you know, we'd love to have this. And they kind of have it. And the guy goes, we can totally do that. And, you know, and they'll sell it right there and then figure it out later.
Yeah.
And I've sat in meetings with a female entrepreneur who has almost that, like they're really close. And you know, somebody's saying we would love this. I'm like, you have that. They're like, it's not, we haven't tested it yet. I'm like, you have it. Tell them you have it. They're like, well, it's not perfect yet. You know? So yeah, I mean, I mean, some of it is cultural as well. I have a female entrepreneur friend who has a theory, and I have to